My sister Monica stood on the inside of the glass terrace doors holding a half-empty glass of Cabernet. She reached forward, turned the brass deadbolt, and gave a slow, cutting smirk. Outside, the October temperature in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, had just dropped to 42 degrees. The thunderstorm was in its first 10 minutes, dropping sheets of freezing rain onto the stone patio. My 7-year-old son, Finn, was on the wrong side of that glass. He pressed his small hands against the wet pane, his shoulders shaking in his thin dress shirt. "He needs to toughen up," Monica said lightly, taking a sip of her wine. He was whining about the wind. My father, Thomas, stood beside her, holding a glass of scotch. He looked at Finn, shivering in the dark, then looked at me and nodded. "She is right, Thalia. You baby him too much. A few minutes in the cold will build some character." We were at my parents' 40th anniversary party. 40 guests were in the rented country club hall, drinking champagne, eating past hors d'oeuvres, and pretending not to notice a child locked in a freezing downpour. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not give my family the hysterical reaction they wanted. I walked directly to the glass doors, unlocked them, and pulled my son inside. I knelt on the hardwood floor and dried his wet face with the hem of my silk dress. The expensive fabric soaked up the rain. I did not care. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened a message thread with Monica's husband, Graham, who was currently taking a business call in the front lobby. I attached one single photograph and hit send. What my father and my sister did not know was that for the last 6 months, I had been holding a highly classified legal document. It proved Monica had secretly mortgaged Graham's commercial real estate properties to funnel $250,000 into my father's failing auto dealership. I paired it with a hotel receipt proving her ongoing affair with Graham's biggest business rival. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the banquet hall swung open, and the reckoning they spent their whole lives avoiding finally arrived. My name is Thalia Campbell. I am 33 years old. If you have ever watched your own family turn on your child for their own amusement, you know the quiet rage that follows. Welcome to Cutie Told Stories. Drop a comment and tell me your age and where you are listening from, and hit subscribe. Before I explain what happened when Graham walked through those oak doors, you need to understand the people in that room. My father ruled our family through financial manipulation, and my mother, Helen, enabled him, just to keep her social status intact. Monica was the undisputed golden child. She could break a window, and my parents would blame the wind. I was the scapegoat, the one they expected to absorb the damage and stay quiet. They thought I was still that same quiet girl tonight. They were wrong. 10 minutes is a very specific duration of time. In the mind of a medical billing auditor, time is a tangible asset, something to be tracked, measured, and leveraged. I counted the seconds, using the silver pocket watch my grandfather, Silas, left me before he passed. The banquet hall buzzed with the ambient noise of inherited wealth and hollow conversations. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated among the round tables, carrying silver trays of crab cakes and bacon-wrapped scallops. A jazz quartet played a low, inoffensive melody in the corner. My mother, Helen, was holding court near a towering ice sculpture shaped like a pair of doves. Her pearls caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. She was performing the role of the devoted matriarch, smiling at the local politicians and country club board members she had invited to witness her milestone. My father, Thomas, stood near the mahogany bar, laughing loudly at a joke someone made about a recent golf tournament. Monica remained near the terrace doors, swirling the dark liquid in her wine glass. She occasionally threw a glance at my son, who was now standing safely beside my chair, wrapped in my arms. She thought she had won the evening. She believed the family hierarchy was intact, that she could inflict cruelty without consequence, and that I would simply absorb the damage the way I always did. I checked my phone screen resting on the table. The message thread with Graham showed the word delivered. 60 seconds later, the text shifted to read, "The blue pixels were the digital equivalent of a lit fuse." I did not look toward the lobby doors. I kept my eyes on Finn, smoothing his damp hair away from his forehead. To understand the magnitude of what was about to happen in that room, you need to understand the precise nature of the photograph sitting in Graham's inbox. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies that other people bury in complex spreadsheets. 3 weeks prior, I had noticed a strange anomaly in a shared family trust ledger. That single loose thread led me to a public record search, which led me to a shell company registered in Delaware. Monica had always been careless with details. She relied on her appearance and our parents' protection to get her out of trouble. But privilege cannot forge a signature on a commercial mortgage application without leaving a paper trail. The photograph I sent Graham was a composite image I had created. The top half was a high-resolution scan of a loan agreement. It proved Monica had leveraged 2 of Graham's prime commercial properties in King of Prussia. She bypassed his authorization using a forged power of attorney. The routing numbers proved the destination of the funds, $250,000 transferred directly into the operating account of Thomas Auto Dealership. My father's business had been drowning in debt for 3 years, and they decided Graham was going to act as their involuntary life raft. The bottom half of the photograph was the kill shot. It was an itemized receipt from the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Philadelphia, dated 3 days after the fraudulent loan closed. Room service for 2 bottles of expensive champagne. The credit card used for the room belonged to Richard Vance Graham's fiercest competitor in the local commercial real estate sector. Monica did not just steal Graham's equity, she funded her infidelity with it. At exactly 8:14 in the evening, the heavy oak doors at the back of the banquet hall swung inward. They did not bang against the walls. Graham did not kick them open. The silence of his entrance was far worse than a shout. He stepped onto the patterned carpet. The man who had walked out to take a business call 10 minutes ago was gone. The man who returned looked like the blood had been drained from his veins through a syringe. His face was the color of old chalk. He gripped his smartphone in his right hand. His knuckles were bone white. The veins in his forearm stood out against the cuff of his tailored suit. He did not look at the ice sculpture. He did not acknowledge the jazz quartet. He locked eyes with his wife across the room. Monica felt the shift in the atmosphere before she saw him. She turned away from the terrace window. The smirk melted off her face, replaced by the instinctual panic of a prey animal caught in the open. Graham closed the distance between the doors and the head table in 15 long strides. The chatter in the hall died down, replaced by the clinking of silverware and confused whispers from the 40 guests. Thomas noticed the sudden silence. He set his scotch on the bar and took a step toward his son-in-law. "Graham, what is going on?" he demanded, using his best patriarchal voice, the one designed to make subordinates flinch. Graham ignored him. He reached Monica. He did not raise his hand. He did not raise his voice. He operated with the cold precision of a man holding a loaded weapon. He reached across his body and slid a platinum wedding band off his left ring finger. He held the metal circle over Monica's wine glass and let it drop. The ring hit the crystal with a sharp ping. Red liquid splashed upward, staining the pristine white tablecloth. "I am filing for divorce in the morning," Graham said. His voice was level, projecting effortlessly across the quiet room. "And my legal team is contacting the district attorney regarding wire fraud and grand larceny. You have until tomorrow to pack your things and get out of my house." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Monica opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. She looked down at the ring resting at the bottom of her Cabernet. Helen, who had been migrating toward the commotion, stopped mid-stride. Her hand went to her chest. She let out a sharp gasp and collapsed onto a velvet dining chair, fanning herself with a linen napkin, performing a theatrical feint because she lacked any other script for public humiliation. Thomas turned a dangerous shade of red. The veins on his neck bulged against his starched collar. He pointed a thick finger at Graham. "You watch your mouth in front of these people," Thomas barked, stepping forward. "You are ruining our anniversary." Graham did not stay to debate a man who had just stolen $250,000 from him. He turned his back on the head table, walked back down the center aisle, and exited through the same oak doors. The room erupted. Guests began murmuring, pulling out cell phones, shifting their gaze between the disgraced patriarch and the sobbing golden child. I did not watch the fallout. I turned my attention back to the only person who mattered. I picked up Finn's navy blue peacoat from the back of my chair. I guided his small arms into the sleeves. I buttoned the front, securing the thick wool collar around his neck. His hands were finally starting to warm up. Finn looked up at me, his brown eyes wide, taking in the chaotic sounds of adults losing their minds over money and reputation. "Are we leaving the bad party?" he asked quietly. I slung my purse over my shoulder and took his hand. "Yes," I whispered, "forever." We walked out of the hall through the side exit near the kitchens. No one stopped us. No one even noticed we were leaving. They were too busy watching the wreckage. The rain was still falling steadily when we reached the parking lot. I strapped Finn into the back seat of my sedan and turned the heater on high. I pulled out of the country club entrance, the tires gripping the wet asphalt. I looked in the rearview mirror. The grand clubhouse stood illuminated against the dark sky, a beautiful facade hiding a decaying foundation. The meticulously crafted public image of Thomas and Helen Campbell was currently shattering into pieces across a banquet hall floor. But as the windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the glass, I knew the night was only the beginning. The photograph I sent Graham was just one piece of paper. I drove through the dark Pennsylvania roads toward our quiet townhouse. My phone resting in the cup holder began to light up. The screen displayed an incoming call from Thomas, then a text, then another call. I did not answer. The financial audit I had been conducting on my family was far from over. In the trunk of my car, sitting inside a locked leather briefcase, were 3 identical red binders. The first boulder had been dropped, but the avalanche was just getting started. Thomas thought he could intimidate me into fixing the mess Graham just created. He had no idea what was waiting for him in the morning. The drive back to our townhouse took 22 minutes. The rain washed the country club dirt off my windshield. In the back seat, Finn fell asleep, his breathing steady and untroubled. For the first time in my life, the airspace inside my car felt entirely mine. Growing up in the Campbell household meant breathing borrowed oxygen. You survived by learning the exact exchange rate of my father's affection. Thomas did not raise children. He acquired dependence. He weaponized college tuitions, car payments, and down payments, turning every dollar into a leash. If you obeyed his commands, the leash loosened. If you questioned his authority, he choked you with debt. My mother, Helen, facilitated this dynamic. She treated motherhood like a public relations assignment. Her primary concern was securing her position on the local charity boards and maintaining her standing at the tennis club. Toxicity was acceptable, provided it remained behind closed doors and did not scuff the mahogany floors. Monica absorbed their lessons perfectly. She learned early that fragility was a currency. Whenever she faced a consequence, she cried, playing the victim until Thomas opened his wallet to shield her. I was assigned a different role. They labeled me the sturdy one. In a modern American family obsessed with optics, sturdy is not a compliment. It is a utility. It means you are the load-bearing wall they expect to hold up the roof while they renovate the master suite. Only one person saw the structural flaw in that design. My grandfather Silas despised the country club crowd. He built his wealth through concrete manufacturing, working with his hands until arthritis curled his fingers. He understood the difference between building something solid and simply painting over rot. During his final days in hospice care, my parents barely visited. They were too busy attending a winter gala. I sat by his bed every evening after finishing my college classes. On his last night, Silas reached into the drawer of his bedside table. His breathing was shallow, oxygen hissing through a plastic tube. He handed me a heavy silver pocket watch. The metal was scratched, worn smooth by decades of friction. "Keep your eyes open, Talia," he whispered, his voice dry like crushed autumn leaves. "People lie. Numbers do not. Time reveals all debts." He passed away the next morning. I carried that pocket watch in my purse for 10 years. It became my moral compass, ticking quietly while I built a life away from the Campbell shadow. I did not enter real estate or auto sales. I became a medical billing auditor. My profession relies on the exact principle Silas taught me. Every day, hospitals process thousands of insurance claims. A single misplaced digit in a billing code can hide a fortune. My job is to stare at endless rows of data, hunting for the invisible anomalies. I strip away the narrative and look only at the math. That clinical mindset is how I dismantled my family. 8 months ago, I received a standard tax document related to Silas' estate. Thomas served as the primary executor. The paperwork looked clean. The margins aligned, the signatures matched, but an auditor does not look at the surface. I noticed a slight inconsistency in the capital gains tax reported on a parcel of land Silas owned in Lancaster. It was a minor discrepancy, maybe a few $100s. My father brushed it off as a clerical rounding error when I brought it up. A normal daughter would have accepted that answer. I pulled the property records. The land had been sold 3 years prior, far beneath market value, to a holding company. I traced the holding company. It belonged to Thomas. He and Monica had been bleeding Silas' estate dry long before the funeral. They siphoned the assets, covered their tracks with fraudulent invoices, and expected the sturdy daughter to blindly sign the annual tax forms. Finding that first stolen asset was like pulling a loose thread on a cheap sweater. Over the next 8 months, I unraveled their entire financial existence. I turned the sedan into my driveway and pressed the garage door opener. The metal gate closed behind us, shutting out the Pennsylvania storm. I unbuckled Finn and carried him inside. Our townhouse was not a sprawling estate. It was modest, clean, and safe. I carried my son upstairs, helped him change into dry pajamas, and tucked him under a thick fleece blanket. He did not ask about his grandfather. He did not ask about his aunt. He closed his eyes and drifted into a deep sleep, untouched by the panic currently spreading through my parents' social circle. I walked downstairs to the kitchen and placed my purse on the granite counter. I reached inside and pulled out the pocket watch. The hands pointed to 9:45. Then I pulled out my cell phone. The screen was a chaotic mosaic of notifications, 47 missed calls. The numbers belonged to Thomas, Helen, and several of my mother's country club friends. My family was trying to drag me back into the arena. A new text message appeared on the lock screen. The preview displayed my father's name. The capitalization was erratic, signaling a frantic state of mind. "You are going to call Graham right now and tell him you forged that picture. Tell him you were having a nervous breakdown. If you do not fix this tonight, I will ruin your life. You have no idea what I can do to you." I read the threat twice. The words lacked any real power. Thomas still believed he was negotiating from a position of strength. He still thought I was the quiet girl who would sacrifice her own sanity to keep the peace. He did not understand that the woman standing in this kitchen had spent 8 months mapping every weakness in his armor. I pressed the side button on the device. The screen went dark. I toggled the silent switch, cutting off the vibration. The kitchen fell into a profound, heavy silence. I walked over to the hallway closet and retrieved the locked leather briefcase I had brought inside from the car. I set it on the dining room table, spun the brass combination dials, and popped the latches. Inside sat 3 red binders thick with bank statements, routing numbers, and forged signatures. My father promised to ruin my life if I did not fix his mistake. He failed to realize his life was currently sitting in a binder on my table. I left the phone in the kitchen. Tomorrow the sun would rise and the real war would begin. I sat at the dining room table long after midnight. The overhead pendant lamp cast a sharp circle of light over the polished oak surface. 3 heavy-duty crimson binders rested in a perfect row. I opened the first one. The plastic page protectors held the anatomy of my parents' greed. While my cell phone continued to light up in the adjacent kitchen with incoming calls from enraged relatives, I focused on the satisfying friction of a yellow highlighter gliding across printed bank records. Emotional chaos requires an audience. Forensic accounting requires only silence and a desk lamp. Over the past 8 months, my evenings consisted of tracing digital footprints. My grandfather Silas trusted my father to execute his final wishes. Thomas treated that trust as a personal slush fund. I tracked the unauthorized withdrawals starting 2 years before Silas entered hospice care. November 12th, $50,000 transferred from the concrete manufacturing business accounts to a phantom holding company. February 3rd, another $75,000. Monica received her cut through a secondary payroll account listed as a consulting fee for a car dealership she never visited. She used the stolen money to fund her country club membership and purchase a pristine white Range Rover. Every luxury they paraded in front of their wealthy friends was subsidized by a dying man. I printed every transaction, matched them with the corresponding dates, and filed them behind reinforced plastic tabs. But stealing from Silas was only half the betrayal. The deeper wound, the one that turned my grief into a cold weapon, involved my own Social Security number. During my junior year at Penn State, I lived on instant oatmeal and worked weekend shifts at a campus library to avoid asking Thomas for financial help. I thought I was building my independence. I did not know my father had already turned my identity into collateral. 3 months into my private audit of the estate, I noticed a recurring routing number paying down a commercial interest loan. The monthly payments were buried deep in a spreadsheet labeled Miscellaneous Expenses. I cross-referenced the account with a credit bureau. It was a business line of credit issued by a regional bank in Delaware. The name on the primary borrower agreement was Thalia Campbell. My father had used my pristine credit history and my signature lifted from a college financial aid form to secure $120,000 in working capital for his failing auto lots. They did not just ignore the sturdy daughter, they actively used me as a financial shield against bankruptcy. For 10 years, I carried a debt I did not know existed, while Thomas criticized my modest townhouse and mocked my sensible sedan. If his dealership went under, the bank would have come after my wages. He was willing to destroy my future to extend his country club facade for a few more months. I spent the spring untangling that fraud. I filed affidavits with the fraud department of the regional bank. I submitted handwriting samples to their investigators. I quietly forced the debt back onto Thomas' personal ledger without tipping him off, using the estate tax inconsistencies as leverage with the bank compliance officers. I documented every step. Those documents now sat in Section 4 of each crimson binder. I took a silver paperclip and secured a final stack of printed emails. The clinical precision of organizing the paperwork grounded me. Helen and Thomas spent their lives performing for a crowd. I spent my life looking at the raw data behind the curtain. The math always tells the truth. I closed the final binder at 4 in the morning. The spine snapped shut with a satisfying click. I carried it to the living room and placed it on the glass coffee table. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a crisp gray dawn. The streets of our neighborhood were silent. I made a pot of black coffee and poured a cup, watching the steam rise against the kitchen window pane. Finn woke up at 7. I made him breakfast. He ate his cereal quietly, unaffected by the shockwaves currently rippling through Bucks County. He drew a picture of a superhero on a napkin. I smiled and pinned it to the refrigerator. At 8:15, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, sudden noise breaking the morning calm. I expected to see my father standing on the porch, face red with rage, ready to unleash the threats he had texted the night before. I placed my coffee mug in the sink. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. It was not Thomas. Graham stood on the welcome mat. His tailored suit from the anniversary party was deeply wrinkled. His tie was missing. The collar of his expensive dress shirt was unbuttoned, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept, a man who had spent the entire night watching the foundation of his life crumble into dust. He looked defeated, but his posture remained resolute. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The brisk autumn air drifted into the foyer. We did not exchange polite greetings. Graham looked at me, his jaw tight. "Monica tried to tell me the photo you sent was a fake," he said, his voice raspy. "She spent 3 hours crying on the kitchen floor, swearing you altered the documents because you were jealous of our marriage." "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her to pack a bag and leave the keys to the Mercedes on the counter," Graham replied. He stepped into the entryway, wiping a hand across his tired face. "You sent me 1 page, Thalia. I know how your mind works. You do not drop a bomb like that unless you have the entire armory. I need the rest of the evidence. My lawyers are drafting the divorce filing right now, but I need the financial records to freeze the commercial assets before Thomas tries to liquidate them." I studied his face. Graham had always been a peripheral figure in my family. A wealthy investor they courted and manipulated. He was arrogant at times, but he was a businessman. He understood contracts and he understood betrayal. Right now, we shared a common enemy. I turned and walked into the dining room. Graham followed me. I picked up one of the crimson binders from the table. It weighed nearly 4 pounds. It contained the bank statements, the forged signatures, the hotel receipts, and the routing numbers for the shell companies. I turned around and held it out to him. Graham took the binder. He felt the weight of it in his hands. He opened the cover and flipped past the title page, his eyes scanning the highlighted columns of the first bank statement. His breathing slowed. The panic of a betrayed husband shifted into the calculated focus of a chief executive preparing for litigation. "Everything is tabbed and indexed," I said, my voice flat. "Section 2 covers the commercial real estate fraud. Section 3 traces the cash flow to the auto dealership. You will want your forensic accountants to look at the offshore holding company listed on page 42. Graham closed the binder. He looked at me with a new, distinct expression. It was respect. "Your father is going to come after you for this," he stated. "He will try," I corrected. Graham nodded once, a brief, silent acknowledgement of our temporary cold alliance. He turned and walked out the front door, carrying the blueprint of my family destruction under his arm. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. The first wave of retaliation was armed and ready to deploy. Graham drove away with the red binder resting on his passenger seat. My front window framed his departure, marking the exact moment the war shifted from private threats to public execution. When my father realized his text messages were met with silence, he understood the old rules of engagement were void. He could not yell me into submission. He could not leverage debt I had already neutralized. Deprived of financial control, my parents pivoted to their secondary arsenal. They weaponized their social circle. In affluent Pennsylvania suburbs, character assassination does not happen through shouting matches on front lawns. It happens in hushed tones over expensive salads. My mother, Helen, was a master of this specific warfare. She possessed a terrifying ability to turn her own cruelty into a narrative of maternal victimhood. By Tuesday morning, the smear campaign was fully operational. Helen began at the country club. She sat on the veranda, ordered sparkling water with lime, and dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. She told the board members and her tennis partners that her eldest daughter was experiencing a severe psychological episode. The phrase she selected was psychotic break. It was clinical sympathetic and devastatingly effective. According to Helen, the stress of single motherhood had fractured my grip on reality. The narrative she spun was a masterpiece of suburban fiction. She claimed I had spent months locked in my townhouse, fueled by a jealous obsession with my sister. The financial documents I sent to Graham were not evidence of fraud, Helen insisted, but the manic Photoshop fabrications of a bitter sibling trying to destroy a happy marriage. Monica played her part perfectly. She appeared at Sunday service wearing minimal makeup, sitting in the front pew, weeping silently, while Thomas held her hand. They presented a united front of tragic, dignified suffering. The gossip spread through the community like oil on wet asphalt. It seeped into the church congregation, the local charity committees, and the extended family tree. People who thrive on status are eager to believe the worst about anyone who threatens the established order. By Wednesday, my phone became a repository for their collective outrage. The text messages arrived in rapid succession. My Aunt Brenda, who had not called me on my birthday in 5 years, sent a lengthy paragraph accusing me of tearing the family apart out of sheer spite. A cousin I had not seen since high school told me I needed serious psychiatric help. The rhetoric was venomous. They called me ungrateful, vindictive, and sick. Most people subjected to a coordinated smear campaign share a predictable reflex. They want to defend themselves. They want to post screenshots on social media, draft long explanatory emails, and beg their relatives to look at the truth. They hand over their energy, trying to convince an audience that has already decided they are guilty. I did not type a single defense. I practiced weaponized silence. When you refuse to engage with a smear campaign, you deprive the attackers of oxygen. Every unanswered text was a mirror held up to their own hysteria. I read the vitriol, archived the messages to maintain a digital record, and locked my screen. I went to work. I audited hospital bills. I made dinner for my son. I let the rumor mill grind itself into dust. On Thursday morning, I decided to test the reach of my mother's narrative. I dropped Finn off at his elementary school and drove to a boutique coffee shop in the center of our suburb. It was the kind of establishment where local socialites gathered after morning spin classes. I walked through the glass doors. The scent of roasted espresso beans and baked pastries filled the air. I approached the counter and ordered a black Americano. I handed the barista my card, my voice steady, my posture straight. As I waited for my drink at the pickup counter, I felt the familiar weight of being watched. 2 tables away sat Patricia Gable. Patricia was a prominent fixture on the charity circuit and one of my mother's closest confidants. She was wearing a tailored athletic jacket gripping a ceramic mug. Patricia was staring at me. Her expression was a cocktail of pity and judgment, the exact look reserved for a woman deemed unstable by the community. She expected me to shrink. She expected me to avoid eye contact, to grab my coffee and flee the shop in disgrace. I picked up my cardboard cup. I turned and looked directly at Patricia. I did not glare, I did not scowl. I offered a flat, polite nod, the kind of acknowledgement you give a stranger in a waiting room. I held her gaze for 4 long seconds. Her confidence wavered. The judgment in her eyes flickered into discomfort. She looked away first, pretending to check her phone. You cannot intimidate a woman who does not value your opinion. I walked out of the coffee shop with my Americano, the crisp autumn wind hitting my face. The social warfare was an inconvenience, but it was hollow. Helen and Thomas were attacking my reputation because they could no longer reach my reality. Or so I thought. I drove home and sat at my kitchen island, opening my laptop to review a pending audit file for work. My personal email inbox refreshed in the background. A new message appeared at the top of the queue. The sender address belonged to the automated security system of Finn's Elementary School. The subject line read, "Alert unauthorized access attempt on student portal." I clicked the email. The school utilized a strict digital security protocol for student records. Parents received an automated notification anytime someone attempted to alter emergency contact information or authorized pickup lists. The timestamp indicated the attempt occurred just 12 minutes ago. Someone had logged into the public-facing side of the portal, requested a password reset for my account, and attempted to add a new name to the list of individuals legally permitted to take my son off school grounds. The system blocked the attempt because the user failed the secondary security verification. The IP address logged in the email was not masked. I recognized the internet service provider. It was the specific local network utilized by the residential blocks in my parents' neighborhood. The coffee in my cup suddenly tasted like ash. The smear campaign was a distraction. The rumors and the judgmental stares were just noise to keep me looking in the wrong direction. Monica was losing her husband, her home, and her financial security. She was desperate for leverage, and she knew the only leverage I cared about was currently sitting in a second-grade classroom. My family had realized they could not break my reputation, so they were escalating the conflict to a terrifying new level. They were targeting my child. I closed my laptop. The silence in the kitchen was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of a countdown clock ticking toward 0. 5 days separated the failed digital login from the physical breach. The weekend dragged by in a state of hypervigilance. Every time a delivery truck drove past my townhouse, I checked the security cameras. Every time my phone vibrated with a new notification, I anticipated a fresh threat. Desperate people do not accept boundaries. When they encounter a locked door, they look for a window. When the digital perimeter holds strong, they resort to trespassing in the real world. Tuesday arrived with a bitter, biting wind that stripped the remaining dead leaves from the oak trees lining the streets. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the glass entrance doors of Oak Ridge Elementary swung inward. Monica walked into the main administrative office. She wore a beige trench coat tied tightly at the waist to accentuate her fragile frame. Her blonde hair was intentionally disheveled strands falling loose around her pale face. She approached the front reception counter, breathing heavily, clutching her expensive leather handbag against her chest. The theatrical performance began. Monica had honed her acting skills during our teenage years. A fabricated tear could excuse missed curfews, ruined property, and skipped classes. My parents rewarded her theatrics, teaching her early on that authority figures were easily swayed by a crying woman offering a tragic story. Now she deployed those same manipulative tactics in a sterile educational environment, assuming the administrative staff would bend to her distress. She leaned over the high wooden counter. She told the front desk staff there was a terrible family emergency. She crafted a lie about a severe auto collision involving me. She claimed she needed to pull Finn out of his second-grade classroom immediately to rush him to the local hospital. She let her voice crack at the exact right moment. She wiped a dry eye with the back of her trembling hand. She played the devoted, terrified aunt flawlessly, expecting the school employees to bypass standard security protocols out of sheer human sympathy. But an auditor plans for the worst-case scenario long before the crisis actually occurs. 3 days before the anniversary party, I sat in a sterile bank lobby with a certified notary public. I drafted a specific, ironclad legal directive regarding my son's safety and physical custody. I cited potential ongoing family disputes. I attached high-resolution, color-printed photographs of my father and my sister. I drove to the school that same afternoon, requested a private meeting with the principal, and handed the folder directly to the administration. I left nothing to chance. The woman sitting behind the reception desk on this particular Tuesday was named Barbara. Barbara had worked in the public school system for over 2 decades. She had seen every messy custody dispute, every lying relative, and every fabricated emergency imaginable. She did not operate on emotion. She operated on rigid, unforgiving protocol. The walls around her desk were covered in laminated safety charts and emergency contact sheets. She listened to Monica's tragic, breathless story without changing her facial expression. Barbara typed Finn's name into the district database. The computer screen flashed a bright red warning banner. She read the digital alert, then opened the bottom drawer of her metal desk. She pulled out a physical manila folder. She placed it on the laminate counter and slid it across the smooth surface. Monica looked down. Staring back at her was a printed photograph of her own face, centered beneath a bold warning label that prohibited any campus access. "I am sorry, ma'am," Barbara said, her tone devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "You are not on the authorized pickup list. In fact, you are explicitly banned from entering this campus under any circumstances. I need you to leave the premises right now." Monica tried to pivot. The sorrow vanished, replaced by indignant entitlement. She raised her voice, attempting to manufacture outrage to regain control of the room. She demanded to speak to the principal, claiming the paperwork was a ridiculous mistake filed by an unstable, jealous sister. She thought raising the volume would intimidate a public school employee into submission. She assumed her zip code and her designer coat granted her special privileges that overrode campus security rules. Barbara did not argue. She did not debate school policy or try to calm Monica down. She simply reached over to her multi-line phone system. She picked up the heavy receiver and dialed 911. She looked Monica directly in the eyes while the line connected. "I am dispatching local authorities to report a hostile trespasser attempting to gain unauthorized access to a minor," Barbara stated into the receiver, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet office. The facade crumbled instantly. The reality of a police interrogation pierced Monica's delusion. A police report meant a permanent public record. It meant answering questions about her current address, which was now a cheap roadside motel, and questions about her husband, who had just filed for divorce and frozen her checking accounts. She turned around and practically ran out of the office. Her heels clicked frantically against the linoleum floor. She pushed through the double doors and sprinted to her vehicle before the patrol car could turn onto the block. I received the phone call from the school administration at 2:20. I left my corporate office immediately, abandoning a spreadsheet midway through a routine audit. The drive took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. I gripped the steering wheel, running through every legal maneuver available to me. When I arrived at the campus, a uniformed patrol officer was already taking a statement from Barbara near the front entrance. I walked into the office, my pulse steady, my mind processing the variables. I did not panic. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford when you are the only line of defense for your child. I thanked Barbara for her incredible diligence. I requested a copy of the official incident report. The responding officer handed me the carbon copy, detailing the exact timeline of the attempted abduction. He advised me to file for a temporary restraining order down at the county courthouse. I thanked him for his time and folded the yellow paper into precise thirds. I walked out to the school parking lot, clutching the thin piece of paper. The cold autumn wind ruffled the edges of my wool coat. My family would not stop. A failed digital login led to a physical confrontation. A physical confrontation would eventually lead to something far more dangerous. They viewed my son as a pawn, a bargaining chip to force a face-to-face negotiation. They wanted to hold my world hostage so they could manipulate me into saving their sinking financial ship. Defensive perimeters were no longer sufficient. Shielding myself and my child behind school protocol was not enough. A restraining order is just a piece of paper to people who believe the law does not apply to them. Every time I blocked an attack, they found a new angle of approach. I needed to dismantle their capacity to wage war entirely. I needed to remove their resources, their leverage, and their sense of impunity. I unlocked my car door and sat in the driver's seat. I pulled out my phone and scrolled past the dozens of unanswered messages from my toxic relatives. I found the contact information for Nadine. Nadine was a high-powered estate attorney. She operated out of a glass high-rise in downtown Philadelphia. She did not deal in family mediation, gentle settlements, or collaborative divorces. She dealt in corporate ruthlessness and legal obliteration. She was the kind of lawyer who dismantled trusts with surgical precision and froze assets before the opposing counsel even knew a lawsuit had been filed. Thomas employed lawyers who played golf at his country club, men who valued handshakes over contracts. I had retained Nadine months ago, keeping her in reserve, knowing a day like this might arrive. The phone rang twice before she answered. Thalia Campbell Nadine said, her voice crisp and professional over the Bluetooth speaker. "Tell me you have good news regarding the audit files we sent over to Graham's legal team." I looked at the brick school building, knowing my son was safe inside his classroom, oblivious to the war raging outside. I tightened my grip on the leather steering wheel. "They tried to pull him from school today," I replied. "My sister showed up claiming a medical emergency. The police were called. She ran before the squad car arrived." Nadine went silent for a brief moment, processing the gravity of the escalation. The legal implications of an attempted abduction shifted our strategy from civil litigation into a much darker territory. We were no longer just dealing with embezzlement and wire fraud. We were dealing with direct threats to a minor. "What is our next move?" Nadine asked, the cadence of her voice dropping an octave, signaling her readiness to go on the offensive. I stared at the yellow incident report resting on my dashboard. The time for waiting had expired. It is time to execute the grandfather clause. My corporate office occupies the 14th floor of a modern steel and glass building in downtown Philadelphia. The lobby is an expansive atrium lined with imported Italian marble and polished chrome fixtures. Security is typically a seamless operation. Employees swipe encrypted identification badges at a bank of electronic turnstiles. Visitors must present a government-issued license to the front desk and wait for a digital pass. The environment is designed to be sterile, predictable, and heavily monitored. It is the exact opposite of the household I grew up in. My father Thomas is a man who relies on physical intimidation to bend the world to his will. He stands 6 feet 3 inches tall, carrying the broad, heavy frame of a former college athlete who transitioned into selling luxury sedans. For 30 years, he used his size and his booming baritone voice to end arguments before they even started. If my mother or Monica ever dared to contradict him, he would step forward, invade their personal space, and let his volume shatter their resistance. He expected the world to shrink when he walked into a room. 2 days after Monica failed to pull my son out of his elementary school, Thomas decided to deploy his intimidation tactics on my professional territory. He assumed I felt safe behind my corporate walls. He wanted to prove that my boundaries were an illusion. At 9:10 in the morning, I rode the elevator down to the lobby to grab a black tea from the ground floor cafe. I stepped out of the stainless steel cab and walked across the vast marble expanse. The morning rush had settled into a quiet hum of executive assistants and commuting executives. I did not see him at first. Thomas had bypassed the front desk entirely. He lurked near the glass entrance, waiting for the precise moment a group of junior analysts swiped their badges. As the electronic glass gates parted, he slipped through behind them, tailgating his way past the perimeter. He spotted me near the cafe entrance and charged across the lobby. "Talia?" The sound of his voice echoed off the high ceilings. Several heads turned. Professionals in tailored suits paused their morning routines to watch a large, red-faced man storm toward a female executive. He closed the distance before I could reach the cafe counter. He planted himself directly in my path, stepping so close I could smell the stale coffee and bitter desperation radiating from his breath. He wore a rumpled gray suit that looked as though he had slept in it. The polished patriarch from the anniversary party was gone, replaced by a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. "You are going to fix this right now," Thomas snarled, keeping his voice just low enough to avoid echoing again, but laced with enough venom to make his intentions clear. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He thrust it toward my chest. It was a pre-drafted legal affidavit. I glanced at the visible text. The document contained a fabricated admission stating the financial ledgers I sent to Graham were digitally altered and that I was suffering from an acute mental health crisis. "Sign it," he demanded, pointing a thick finger at the signature line. "You are going to sign this, and I am going to take it directly to Graham's attorneys." I looked at the crumpled paper, then up at his face. I did not step back. I did not flinch. Years ago, this exact scenario would have sent my nervous system into a panic spiral. I would have cried, I would have looked around the lobby mortified by the public scene, and signed whatever he wanted just to make the humiliation stop. He was banking on that old version of his daughter. He was relying on a ghost. "I am not signing anything," I replied. My voice was level, matching the ambient hum of the building ventilation system. Thomas stepped even closer, attempting to use his physical mass to crowd me into the cafe wall. "If you do not sign this piece of paper today, I will drag you through the most brutal defamation lawsuit this state has ever seen," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "I will sue you for every penny you have. I will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt. You will lose your job, you will lose your son, and you will be begging me for a loan to keep a roof over your head." I reached into the side pocket of my wool slacks. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the silver pocket watch my grandfather Silas had given me. I pulled it out and flipped the heavy cover open with my thumb. I looked at the hands ticking steadily behind the scratched glass. "It is 9:14 in the morning," I stated, clicking the watch shut and slipping it back into my pocket. Thomas blinked, confused by the non sequitur. "What are you talking about?" "I am noting the exact time of the harassment," I explained, looking him directly in the eyes. I raised my right hand and pointed toward the ceiling. "Look up." Thomas broke eye contact and followed my gesture. Mounted in the corners of the atrium, positioned at intersecting angles, were 4 high-definition security cameras. Their black glass lenses were fixed directly on our position. "This building does not use standard closed-circuit television," I informed him, speaking slowly so the reality could penetrate his anger. "Those cameras record in 4K resolution. They capture audio. They are currently documenting a large man trespassing in a secured commercial building, cornering a female employee, and attempting to coerce her into signing a fraudulent legal document under threat of financial ruin." His jaw tightened. The veins on his temple began to throb. "You are bluffing," he muttered, though the doubt was already bleeding into his tone. I lowered my hand. "I am an auditor, Thomas. I do not bluff. I document." When Monica attempted her stunt at the elementary school, I realized my family would not stop at digital harassment. The very next morning, I printed a high-resolution photograph of my father and handed it to the head of building security. I explained that an estranged hostile relative might attempt to breach the premises. I authorized them to use whatever force necessary to remove him if he appeared. I did not need to raise my voice to summon help. I simply turned my head toward the main security desk and raised 2 fingers into the air. The response was immediate. The head of security, a broad-shouldered former Marine named Davis, had been watching the interaction on his monitors since Thomas breached the turnstiles. Davis and 2 other uniformed guards marched across the marble floor. Their heavy boots echoed through the lobby. They did not ask Thomas politely to leave. They flanked him. "Sir, you are trespassing on private property," Davis said, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. "You need to exit the building right now or you will be removed in handcuffs." Thomas looked at the 3 guards. He looked at the growing crowd of my colleagues who had stopped drinking their coffee to watch the spectacle. The wealthy, untouchable patriarch was being treated like a common vagrant. His pride, the most fragile asset he owned, shattered right there on the polished Italian marble. He realized he had no leverage. He could not bully the security team. He could not bully the cameras. He could not bully the daughter he spent 3 decades underestimating. "Fine," Thomas spat, jerking his shoulders back and attempting to salvage some shred of dignity. He stuffed the useless affidavit back into his coat pocket. "I am leaving." The guards did not give him the satisfaction of a solitary exit. They stepped in close, forcing him to walk between them. They escorted him toward the revolving glass doors at the front of the building. The entire lobby watched in deafening silence. It was a profound public dismantling of the power he had wielded my entire life. I stood near the cafe watching him walk away. The threat was neutralized. The perimeter was secure. But as the security guards pushed him toward the revolving doors, Thomas stopped. He ignored the guard's hands on his shoulders. He turned around, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. He realized he could not win the physical confrontation, so he deployed his final hidden weapon. He raised his voice, ensuring the sound carried across the expanse of the lobby. "You think you are so smart, Talia?" he shouted. "You think you have everything locked down? You do not even own the house you live in. Check your deed." The guard shoved him through the revolving doors before he could say another word. The glass spun, pushing him out into the cold Philadelphia morning. The lobby slowly returned to normal. People resumed their conversations. The espresso machines began hissing again. I stood perfectly still. The ambient noise faded into a dull roar in my ears. I bought my townhouse 5 years ago. I paid the mortgage every single month. My name was on the mailbox. But my father did not make empty threats regarding real estate. If he told me to check the deed, he had planted a landmine in the paperwork long before the war ever started. The physical ambush was a failure, but the parting words achieved their goal. My safe haven, the only place my son felt secure, was suddenly standing on shifting sand. I walked out of the lobby, skipping my coffee, and headed straight for the elevators. I needed to call Nadine immediately. The minor skirmish was over, but a terrifying new conflict had just breached my front door. My corporate building vanished in the rearview mirror of the taxi. I did not return to my desk on the 14th floor. I instructed the driver to take me directly to the legal district. The ride lasted 12 minutes. I spent that time staring at the passing traffic, dissecting my father's parting words. Nadine operates out of a firm that occupies the top 3 floors of a steel monolith. Her corner office features floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Schuylkill River. She sat behind a pristine glass desk, wearing a tailored navy suit, her posture impeccable. She did not offer me water or small talk. She saw my expression and turned her computer monitor toward us. "Tell me what happened," Nadine instructed, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I recounted the physical ambush in the lobby. I detailed the fake affidavit, then I repeated the final threat: check the deed. Nadine typed a sequence of commands into the county property registry database. We sat in silence while the digital gears turned. 5 years ago, I purchased my townhouse. I saved diligently for a down payment, hoarding every spare dollar from my billing audits. But the closing costs were higher than expected. Thomas offered a $15,000 gift. He called it an early inheritance, a rare gesture of paternal support. He handed me a stack of closing documents to sign during a family dinner, dismissing the paperwork as standard bank formalities. I was 28 years old. I trusted the man who raised me. That was my critical error. An auditor should never sign unread paperwork, especially when it is handed to her by a predator. Nadine clicked a digital file. The high-resolution scan of my property deed appeared on her screen. She scrolled past the standard title information, her eyes scanning the fine print. She stopped at an addendum attached to the final page. It was a promissory note heavily masked in dense legal jargon. "Your father did not give you a gift," Nadine stated, her voice tight. "He recorded a secondary lien against the property. He embedded a demand clause. It grants him the unilateral right to call the loan in full with compounding interest at any time. If you cannot produce the sum within 30 days, he holds the legal authority to force a sale of the asset to recover his funds." The air in the corner office grew thin. Thomas had weaponized my only sanctuary. He planted a ticking bomb in the foundation of my home, waiting 5 years for the exact moment I dared to defy him. The sum with the predatory interest rate attached was astronomical. I did not have that kind of liquid capital sitting in a checking account. My father knew it. He wanted to render my son and me homeless as punishment for exposing his embezzlement. The theoretical threat materialized the very next afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen island helping Finn with a math worksheet. The doorbell chimed. I opened the heavy wooden door to find a man in a windbreaker holding a manila envelope. He asked to confirm my identity. When I nodded, he thrust the envelope into my hands and walked away without another word. It was a formal notice of default and intent to foreclose, filed by Thomas Legal Counsel. The 30-day countdown had officially started. Finn looked up from his worksheet, tapping his pencil against the granite counter. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sensing the shift in the room. "Everything is fine," I replied, folding the notice and sliding it into my pocket. I kissed the top of his head and told him to finish his fractions. I walked into the living room and stared at the walls. The framed photographs, the bookshelves, the rug I bought with my first promotion. My father wanted to strip it all away. He believed he held the ultimate trump card: For a brief, suffocating moment, the antagonist appeared to have the undeniable upper hand. I felt the familiar grip of childhood vulnerability creeping back into my chest. But I am not the naive girl who signed those papers 5 years ago. I picked up my car keys, I grabbed the leather briefcase containing my grandfather Silas' original estate records. I drove straight back to downtown Philadelphia. Nadine was waiting for me in a private conference room. The long mahogany table was clear. I set the briefcase down and popped the brass latches. We needed to dig deeper. If Thomas could hide a predatory lien in a stack of closing documents, Silas could hide a countermeasure in a master trust. We spent 3 hours reviewing the original ledgers. We scrutinized the establishment dates, the beneficiary designations, and the executor guidelines. We were hunting for a structural flaw in Thomas' authority. Around 6 in the evening, I unzipped a hidden compartment in the back of the leather briefcase. It contained a stack of yellowed bank envelopes from the year Silas passed away. I had sorted through them months ago, assuming they held nothing but cleared checks. But as I slid the contents of a thick envelope onto the table, a folded piece of heavy stock paper slipped out. It was not a bank statement. It was a handwritten letter penned in blue ink. The handwriting was shaky, distinctively belonging to a man whose joints ached with arthritis. I unfolded the paper. The date at the top proved it was written 2 weeks before Silas entered hospice care. Nadine leaned over my shoulder. We read the words together. Talia, Silas wrote, I know my son. Thomas measures his worth by the things he can control. When he can no longer control you, he will try to destroy what you have built. I am leaving him the bulk of the estate because I want him to believe he won. But true wealth requires character, and Thomas lacks it. I have instructed my attorneys to structure the master trust with a specific condition. They call it a poison pill. I call it an insurance policy for you. Time reveals all debts. I handed the letter to Nadine. Her eyes widened. She turned away from the table and sprinted to her computer terminal in the corner of the room. She pulled up the master trust documents established by Silas' legal team nearly a decade ago. She bypassed the standard distribution schedules and scrolled to the penalty clauses hidden at the very bottom of the file. Her fingers stopped clicking. She stared at the screen, her lips parted in silent disbelief. A slow, shark-like smile spread across her face. Read it to me, I requested, standing near the mahogany table. Nadine turned her chair around. Silas embedded an automatic default mechanism within the primary inheritance structure. It stipulates that if the primary beneficiary, Thomas, initiates any hostile financial or legal action against the secondary beneficiary, which is you, he immediately breaches the terms of the trust. What is the penalty for the breach? I asked, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together in my mind. Nadine tapped the screen. The penalty is total forfeiture. The moment Thomas filed that formal notice to force the sale of your home, he triggered the clause. By attacking your property, he legally forfeited his right to his primary asset under the trust. I processed the magnitude of the legal mechanism. What is his primary asset? Nadine looked at me, her eyes shining with the thrill of a flawless legal victory. The primary asset is the $1.2 million estate he currently lives in, the house he and Helen use to host their country club dinners, the property he uses to project his wealth to the entire suburb. Silas structured it so that if Thomas ever tried to take your home, the deed to his own mansion would automatically transfer directly to you. The silence in the conference room was profound. The sheer brilliance of my grandfather's foresight was overwhelming. Silas knew his son was a predator. He knew I would eventually become the target. He handed Thomas a loaded weapon, knowing the recoil would be fatal. My father thought he was executing a flawless checkmate. He thought the eviction notice would force me to drop the embezzlement charges and surrender to his authority. He had no idea that his demand letter was the exact key required to unlock his own ruin. Draft the transfer paperwork, I instructed Nadine, my voice steady, stripped of any residual fear. File it with the county clerk first thing tomorrow morning. The property trap had indeed sprung, but Thomas was the one standing on the snare. My home was secure, his home was mine. The war was about to arrive on his front porch, and he had sent the invitation himself. As I walked out of the law firm into the crisp evening air, I felt the weight of the pocket watch in my slacks. Silas was right. The math always tells the truth, and the ledger was finally balancing. Thomas initiated a minor conflict to secure a townhouse, but he had just lost his entire kingdom. I unlocked my sedan, ready to return to my son, secure in the knowledge that our roof was permanent while the sky above my parents was about to cave in. The legal machinery required to execute the forfeiture of $1 million estate does not operate overnight. Nadine filed the paperwork with the county clerk the moment the courthouse opened the following morning. The bureaucratic system moves at its own methodical pace, meaning my father remained entirely oblivious to the trap closing around his neck. Thomas believed his eviction notice had struck a fatal blow. He assumed I was currently sitting inside my townhouse, terrified, desperate, and drafting a surrender. In his playbook, breaking a victim down with a legal threat was merely step 1. Step 2 required sending in an emotional proxy to extract the actual concession. He deployed my sister. Monica was the velvet glove concealing my father's iron fist. Whenever Thomas caused a fracture in our family, Monica played the role of the peacemaker. She would cry, beg for unity, and weaponize guilt until the injured party apologized just to make her stop weeping. I knew a follow-up strike was imminent, but I expected it to happen through a mediator or a formal letter. I did not expect the ambush to occur in the produce section of a local grocery store. It was Thursday evening. The supermarket was crowded with professionals picking up ingredients after their commutes. I pushed my cart down the brightly illuminated aisle, selecting organic Honeycrisp apples, inspecting the skin for blemishes. The mundane task provided a comforting rhythm. The scent of damp earth and fresh citrus hung in the air. Then I heard the sniffle. It was a calculated wet sound, designed specifically to draw attention. I turned around and saw my sister blocking the end of the aisle. Monica had undergone a radical physical transformation. The pristine country club aesthetic she wore to the anniversary party was gone. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy, uneven knot, with dark roots showing at the part. She wore a faded gray cashmere sweater that looked 2 sizes too big, swallowing her fragile frame. She had intentionally skipped her makeup routine, allowing the dark circles under her eyes to feature prominently against her pale skin. She looked shattered, discarded, and pathetic. It was a brilliant costume. "Thalia," she whispered, letting her voice crack on the syllables of my name. I did not reach out. I kept my hands resting firmly on the handle of my shopping cart. Monica stepped closer, invading my personal space. She began to cry. It was not a silent weeping. She ensured her sobs were audible enough for the shoppers in the adjacent bakery aisle to hear. She was intentionally building an audience. "Please," she sobbed, grabbing the sleeve of my wool coat, "you have to stop this. Graham froze all my checking accounts this morning. My credit cards are declining. I have nowhere to go. I am sleeping in a cheap motel off the interstate. Dad is having panic attacks over the house. We are losing everything we have." She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with manufactured tears. "Remember, we are sisters. We share the same blood. You cannot just throw your own flesh and blood to the wolves. Please just call Graham. Tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you were angry and exaggerated the paperwork. If you just give Dad the deed to your townhouse, he will forgive you. We can be a family again." I watched her perform. The script was identical to the fake affidavit Thomas tried to force on me in the corporate lobby. They needed me to admit fault. They needed me to say I was acting out of spite. When I remained silent, Monica escalated the performance. She raised her volume, ensuring a woman picking out avocados nearby stopped to watch the spectacle. "Why are you doing this to us?" Monica pleaded, her tone shifting seamlessly from sorrow to a subtle prodding accusation. "Why are you trying to extort our father? Are you trying to steal his money? You are demanding he sign over his assets just to keep you from ruining my marriage, right? Tell me why you are threatening him." She was baiting me. She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to lean in and snarl a vicious remark. She wanted me to say I was going to ruin them all. In modern American litigation, an angry statement or a recorded threat can unravel months of careful legal strategy. My father knew he needed leverage, and he sent his golden child to manufacture it. I looked down at her hands. She was clutching her oversized designer handbag tightly against her stomach. The brass zipper across the top was left open exactly 2 inches. I am an auditor. My entire career is predicated on noticing anomalies that other people gloss over. The interior lining of her handbag was dark, but a faint, rhythmic red pulse caught my eye. It was blinking steadily in the shadows of the expensive leather. She was wearing a wire. More accurately, she had a digital voice recorder running inside her purse. Pennsylvania operates under a two-party consent law. Recording a private conversation without permission is a crime. However, in a public grocery store, the legal expectation of privacy is murky. A desperate defense attorney could attempt to submit the audio into discovery during a civil trial to prove I was blackmailing my father. Thomas had sent her here to gather ammunition. They needed me to make a threat they could play for a judge during the impending eviction hearing. The trap was remarkably clever, but it relied entirely on my participation. I picked up a clear plastic produce bag filled with 6 heavy Honeycrisp apples. I took a deliberate step forward, closing the gap between us. I pressed the bag of apples firmly against the opening of her handbag. The dense fruit effectively muffled the hidden microphone, shielding our physical interaction from the digital recorder. I leaned in close. I did not glare. I kept my facial muscles entirely relaxed. When I spoke, my voice was flat, clinical, and devoid of any emotional frequency for the microphone to register. On October 12th of last year, you transferred $45,000 from Silas Estate into a phantom payroll account, I stated quietly, my words slicing through her fabricated sobs. On November 18th, you forged Graham's signature on a power of attorney document notarized by a man who lost his license 3 years ago. On November 21st, you funneled exactly $250,000 of equity into Thomas Failing Dealership. Monica's breath hitched. The crying stopped instantly. Her eyes widened in genuine shock, realizing I was not taking the emotional bait. I was reciting the ledger. 3 days after you stole your husband's equity, you checked into room 412 at the Four Seasons downtown with Richard. I continued maintaining my steady, monotone delivery. The room service bill was $412. You charged it to Richard's corporate platinum card. Your hotel key swipe is time-stamped at 9:14 in the evening. I backed away and lifted the bag of apples off her purse, tossing them casually into the front of my shopping cart. I looked at the dark opening of her handbag, then back up at her pale face. "I hope you got that on tape," I said. Monica stood frozen in the produce aisle. The fragile victim persona evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, unfiltered terror. Her psychological manipulation was entirely useless against my factual armor. She had come to the supermarket to gather ammunition for Thomas, hoping to record a bitter sister making an illegal threat. Instead, all she managed to capture was an itemized, highly specific confession of her own federal felonies. She turned and walked away, leaving her shopping basket abandoned on the polished concrete floor. She did not look back. Her shoulders slumped, carrying the weight of a woman who finally understood she had brought a microphone to a gunfight. I finished my grocery shopping in peace. I paid for my apples, walked out into the crisp evening air, and loaded my paper bags into the trunk of my sedan. The pathetic ambush confirmed one crucial detail. My family was out of viable options. They were reduced to playing hidden recorder games in public spaces because their formal power structures were collapsing. But as I started my engine, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text message from Nadine. The message was brief, but it signaled the beginning of the final economic collapse. "Graham just dropped the hammer," Nadine wrote. "Check your email." The minor skirmishes in grocery stores and corporate lobbies were officially over. The financial freeze Graham and his legal team had been preparing was about to hit my parents with the force of a freight train. I shifted the car into drive, a sense of profound calm settling over my chest. Thomas was about to learn that the consequences of locking a child in a storm do not fade with the weather. Friday mornings for Helen Campbell followed a rigid and predictable schedule. 11 o'clock brunch at the country club dining room overlooking the 18th hole was not just a meal, it was a weekly performance. She sat with 3 other women who wore silk scarves and measured their worth in zip codes and charity gala invitations. Helen ordered sparkling water with a slice of lemon and a niçoise salad. She laughed at a mundane joke about a local zoning board member. She projected the pristine image of a woman untouched by scandal or consequence. When the leather checkbook arrived at the table, she casually slid her heavy platinum credit card onto the silver tray. She continued discussing an upcoming silent auction, oblivious to the digital guillotine dropping on her financial existence. 10 minutes passed before the club manager approached their table. He did not offer his usual obsequious smile. He leaned down and spoke quietly, his voice pitched carefully to avoid echoing across the dining room. He informed Helen that her transaction declined. Helen scoffed, blaming a ridiculous bank error, and produced a secondary gold card from her designer wallet. The manager took it to the terminal. It also declined. He returned to the table, his posture stiff and formal. He requested she accompany him to the private administrative office near the coat check. Helen stood up, her face flushing a deep and sudden crimson. The other women stopped talking, their eyes tracking her departure with predatory interest. In the privacy of the back office, the manager explained that their corporate accounting department received a direct notice from a legal entity. All assets tied to Thomas Campbell were officially frozen under an emergency forensic audit mandate. The club required immediate payment for the meal and politely suggested Helen leave the premises until her accounts were cleared. She walked out the rear exit near the service elevators, stripped of her dignity, holding a leather handbag that contained nothing but useless plastic rectangles. While Helen suffered her quiet expulsion in the suburbs, Thomas sat in his glass-walled office overlooking the auto dealership's showroom floor. He poured a cup of black coffee and settled into his tufted leather executive chair. He booted up his desktop computer, preparing to transfer routine funds to cover a delayed shipment of luxury sedans from a regional distributor. He typed his credentials into the commercial banking portal. The screen loaded slowly, replacing his standard financial dashboard with a stark white page featuring bold red text. Access denied. Account suspended pending legal review. Thomas slammed the enter key, hoping to bypass the error. The warning remained fixed on the screen. He picked up his office phone and dialed his private banking liaison. The representative sounded nervous and evasive. He informed Thomas that a team of litigators representing Graham's commercial real estate firm executed an emergency injunction at 9 that morning. Graham's attorneys presented a federal judge with irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, backed by the comprehensive red binder I handed Graham days earlier. The judge granted an immediate freeze on all business and personal accounts linked to Thomas, pending a full forensic investigation. The holding company, the payroll accounts, the operational credit lines, everything was locked down tightly. Thomas slammed the receiver down onto the base. He looked out the glass window at his pristine showroom. The shiny vehicles sitting under the bright fluorescent lights no longer represented his wealth or his power. They represented collateral he could no longer touch or liquidate. The empire he built on manipulation and theft evaporated in a matter of hours, dissolved by the very son-in-law he thought he could effortlessly exploit. I spent that same Friday afternoon far removed from the collapsing country club facades and frozen auto lots. I finished my auditing shifts early, picked Finn up from school, and drove to a local outdoor outfitter. The autumn air was growing colder every day, signaling the rapid approach of a harsh Pennsylvania winter. My family tried to use the cold against my son. They locked him out on a terrace in a freezing storm to teach him a twisted lesson about obedience and endurance. I countered their cruelty by providing actual, tangible warmth. We walked down the wide aisles lined with heavy-duty outdoor gear and insulated clothing. Finn stopped in front of a display of high-performance winter boots. He picked up a pair of sturdy, waterproof snow boots with thick rubber treads and bright orange laces. He asked if they were strong enough to walk through deep puddles on the playground. I knelt beside him on the carpeted floor and checked the synthetic insulation rating on the tag. I told him they were strong enough to walk through a blizzard without his toes getting cold. He smiled a genuine, bright smile and sat on the wooden bench to try them on. I laced them up, pulling the thick strings tight, ensuring his feet were secure and entirely protected from the elements. The simple act of buying my son winter shoes felt profound. It was a physical demonstration of safety and parental duty. I handed my debit card to the cashier. The transaction processed instantly, a quiet victory funded by honest work and meticulous billing audits. We left the store holding a shopping bag that symbolized moving forward, leaving the freezing terrace far behind us in the past. We returned to the townhouse just as the sun began to set behind the neighborhood trees. I placed the new boots near the front door to dry. My cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, breaking the peaceful silence of our home. I checked the screen. The notification displayed a new voicemail from Helen. I pressed play, turning the speaker volume low so Finn would not hear the noise from the living room. Helen did not sound like the polished matriarch from the brunch table. Her voice was shrill, panicked, and unmoored. She wept openly into the receiver, her breath catching in her throat. She begged me to call Graham on their behalf. She pleaded with me to make the corporate lawyer stop digging into the offshore accounts. She claimed the country club humiliation ruined her life, and that Thomas was pacing the living room, throwing glass tumblers against the brick fireplace in a blind rage. She used the word please 7 times in the first 20 seconds of the recording. She wanted me to fix the financial catastrophe they brought upon themselves through their own greed. I listened to her beg for exactly 30 seconds. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel a sudden biological urge to rescue the woman who stood idly by while my son shivered in the pouring rain. I tapped the glass screen and deleted the audio file before she finished speaking her final sentence. The digital trash bin swallowed her desperation permanently. Some bridges burn and some rot away from neglect, but neither type is worth crossing again once you realize the land on the other side is barren. I opened my laptop on the kitchen island to check a pending work email for a hospital client. A priority message sat at the top of my inbox. It was not from a medical billing director. It was a formal legal communication forwarded by Nadine. The subject line indicated an urgent legal summons requiring an immediate response. Thomas finally realized his physical intimidation tactics were useless against an opponent who documented every move. His liquid money was frozen, his social standing was erased, his attempts to corner me resulted in public removal by security guards. He abandoned his arrogance and hired a legitimate defense attorney, a man desperate enough to try and salvage the unsalvageable remnants of the estate. The email contained a mandatory mediation request. The defense counsel wanted to arrange a formal sit-down in a neutral environment. They were hoping to negotiate a rapid ceasefire before the wire fraud charges advanced to a federal criminal indictment and the property default finalized the loss of his mansion. I read the digital summons twice, analyzing the desperate undertones of the legal phrasing. A mandatory mediation meant sitting across a long table from the very people who tried to render me homeless just days prior. It meant looking Thomas in the eyes while his empire burned to ash. I forwarded the message back to Nadine with a single word of confirmation. I agreed to the meeting. My father wanted to negotiate a surrender to save his house, but he had no idea I was bringing a legal weapon he could not possibly counter. The financial freeze was merely the preamble to the real destruction. The actual execution would take place in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Philadelphia, where every stolen dollar and every broken boundary would finally balance on the ledger. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Nadine's downtown firm featured panoramic views of the Philadelphia skyline. The space was designed to intimidate. The walls were constructed of seamless, soundproof glass. The central table was carved from a single slab of dark walnut, surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs that cost more than most residential mortgages. The environment offered no comfort, no warmth, and nowhere to hide. It was the perfect venue for an execution. We arrived at exactly 10 in the morning. Nadine carried a slim leather briefcase. I carried nothing but the second red binder resting it against my hip. We pushed through the heavy glass doors and found the opposition already seated on the far side of the table. The visual deterioration of my family was striking. A week prior, they projected the polished, untouchable aura of suburban royalty. Today, they looked like refugees from a collapsed regime. Thomas wore a navy suit that hung loosely on his broad frame, his posture sagging, his face devoid of its usual ruddy arrogance. Helen sat beside him, clutching a designer handbag in her lap, her eyes darting nervously around the austere room. She had foregone her usual pearls and bright lipstick, appearing pale and diminished. Monica occupied the chair at the end of their row. She stared blankly at the polished wood grain, her hands trembling slightly, the reality of her impending divorce and frozen bank accounts visibly weighing on her shoulders. Sitting between Thomas and Helen was their newly retained defense attorney, a man named Sterling. He arranged pristine legal pads and silver pens in a neat row across his section of the table. He wore a forced, diplomatic smile, projecting the false confidence of a litigator who believed he could negotiate a ceasefire with a few well-placed legal threats. Nadine and I took our seats opposite them. I did not offer a greeting. I did not ask how they were doing. I rested my hands on the cool surface of the table and waited. Sterling cleared his throat, attempting to establish dominance over the proceedings. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned forward, adopting a tone of reasonable compromise. "We appreciate you agreeing to this meeting," Talia Sterling began, utilizing my first name in a calculated attempt to foster a sense of familiarity. This situation has escalated far beyond what is beneficial for anyone involved. Litigation is expensive, public, and destructive. My clients are prepared to offer a generous resolution to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind all of us. He slid a thin, stapled document across the walnut surface. It stopped inches from Nadine's hands. "Thomas is willing to withdraw the foreclosure notice on your townhouse," Sterling explained, gesturing to the paper. "You will retain full ownership of your property without any further financial demands from his estate. In exchange, my clients require you to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You must formally retract the financial allegations submitted to Graham's legal counsel and cease all auditing inquiries into the family trust. We drop the eviction and you drop the embezzlement claims. We consider the ledger balanced and part ways amicably." The audacity of the settlement offer hung in the sterile air. Thomas wanted to trade a fraudulent predatory lien for total immunity from federal wire fraud. He thought he still held a viable bargaining chip. He believed the threat of rendering my son homeless was enough to force my surrender. Thomas watched my face, waiting for relief to wash over my features. He expected me to seize the opportunity to save my home. Helen leaned forward, a fragile, hopeful expression blooming on her face, anticipating a swift end to her social exile. I remained entirely silent. I did not look at the settlement document. I did not look at my father. I turned my head slightly toward Nadine, yielding the floor. Nadine did not touch Sterling's paperwork. She unclasped her briefcase and withdrew a thick, bound folder bearing the insignia of my late grandfather's original estate firm. She placed it squarely in the center of the table. "That is a fascinating proposal, Mr. Sterling," Nadine stated, her voice crisp, carrying the sharp edge of a honed blade. "However, your clients no longer possess the leverage required to negotiate a settlement. The eviction notice you filed against my client was not a bargaining chip, it was a trigger." Sterling frowned, his diplomatic smile faltering. "I am not sure I understand your implication, counsel." Nadine opened the bound folder and turned to the final tab. "Let me clarify the legal architecture of the Silas Campbell Master Trust. When Silas established the primary inheritance structure, granting Thomas the bulk of his assets, he embedded a specific conditional clause. He anticipated that your client might eventually utilize his financial resources to attack his eldest daughter. Silas engineered an automatic default mechanism to prevent exactly that scenario." Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. His eyes darted toward the open folder, the color draining further from his cheeks. "The clause dictates that if the primary beneficiary initiates any hostile legal or financial action against the secondary beneficiary, the primary beneficiary immediately breaches the terms of the inheritance," Nadine explained, reading directly from the highlighted text. "The penalty for this breach is total forfeiture of the primary asset." Sterling reached out his hand, hovering over the table. "May I see that document?" Nadine slid a certified copy toward him. "The moment you served Thalia with a formal notice of intent to foreclose, your client violated the core condition of the trust. By attempting to seize her property, Thomas legally surrendered his own." The silence in the glass room deepened thick and suffocating. The defense attorney scanned the dense legal paragraphs, his eyes tracing the undeniable signatures and notary stamps. He swallowed hard, the realization dawning on him that he had led his client directly into a fatal trap. "What does that mean?" Helen whispered, her voice cracking as she looked between her husband and her lawyer. "It means your current residence in the suburbs no longer belongs to you," Nadine answered, delivering the blow with clinical detachment. "The $1.2 million estate automatically transferred into Talia's Protective Trust the instant you filed the foreclosure paperwork. I submitted the deed transfer to the county clerk yesterday morning. You are currently residing in a property owned entirely by your daughter." Thomas opened his mouth, his jaw working silently, but his booming voice failed him. The patriarch who spent his life weaponizing real estate and finances was suddenly dispossessed. His kingdom evaporated, seized by a dead man foresight and a sturdy daughter's patience. His shoulders caved inward, his large frame shrinking against the leather chair as the magnitude of his ruin settled over him. And before you attempt to pivot your strategy, Nadine continued, turning her attention toward the far end of the table, you should know that the financial freeze is merely the beginning of the fallout. Graham's legal team reviewed the audit ledgers Thalia provided. They found the evidence irrefutable. Monica stopped staring at the table. She looked up, her breathing turning shallow and erratic. Graham's counsel bypassed civil litigation and filed formal criminal referrals with the federal prosecutor's office yesterday afternoon, Nadine stated. They submitted the forged power of attorney, the illicit wire transfers, and the offshore holding company records. The authorities are currently preparing warrants for wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. A sharp guttural sob erupted from Monica's throat. The fragile facade she maintained for 3 decades shattered into dust. She buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly, the reality of a federal indictment eclipsing her petty suburban grievances. She realized her tears could not manipulate a judge, and her father no longer possessed the capital to buy her way out of a prison sentence. Helen reached out to comfort her favored child, but her hand froze in midair, paralyzed by the sheer scope of the devastation. The family that prided itself on optics and control was reduced to a tableau of weeping, silent defeat. They sat in the glass cage, stripped of their assets, their reputations, and their defenses. The mediation was over. There were no terms left to debate, no compromises left to forge. The war ended not with a shouting match, but with the quiet turning of a legal page. I placed my hands on the walnut table and pushed my chair back. I stood up, the legs of the chair gliding smoothly across the carpet. I reached down and picked up the second red binder resting on the floor beside me. I lifted the heavy plastic cover, filled with the itemized receipts, the forged signatures, and the undeniable proof of their greed. I placed the binder in the exact center of the table, sliding it forward until it rested inches from my father's folded hands. Thomas finally looked up at me. His eyes were hollow, reflecting a man who had lost everything because he refused to stop taking. "You locked my son out in the cold," I said, my voice steady, carrying the calm authority of a woman who had finally balanced the ledger. "Now I am locking you out." I turned and walked toward the glass doors, leaving the room without looking back. Nadine gathered her briefcase and followed closely behind. We stepped into the hallway, the heavy doors sealing the sound of Monica's sobbing behind us. The legal ambush was a flawless execution. The property was secured, the fraud was exposed, and the legacy of Silas Campbell was protected. But as I pressed the button for the elevator, I knew the physical reality of their dispossession was still looming. The paperwork was filed, but the true consequence would arrive when the sheriff deputies knocked on their front door, ensuring my final promise became a reality. Arrogance is a stubborn affliction. Following the mediation in Philadelphia, my parents retreated to their sprawling suburban estate and locked the heavy oak doors. They convinced themselves the trust forfeiture was a hollow threat. In their minds, I remained the compliant daughter who lacked the stomach for genuine confrontation. They believed I would never actually force them onto the street. They spent the next 30 days living in a state of profound delusion. Helen continued tending her rose bushes. Thomas kept parking his leased sedan in the circular driveway. They ignored the certified letters Nadine sent via registered mail. The legal notices detailed the exact timeline of their impending removal, citing the specific statutes of Pennsylvania property law. My father threw those envelopes into the fireplace unopened. He assumed the legal system operated on a sliding scale, favoring men who smoked cigars on golf courses. He was incorrect. The law operates on strict deadlines. 30 days expired. I did not grant an extension. I did not send a final warning. An auditor follows the exact letter of the contract. On a crisp Tuesday morning in November, the temperature hovered near freezing. Frost coated the manicured lawns of my parents' affluent neighborhood. At 8 in the morning, 2 county sheriff cruisers turned onto their quiet street. The vehicles did not activate their sirens, but the flashing blue and red lights painted the neighboring brick facades with undeniable urgency. The deputies parked directly behind Thomas's car, blocking any chance of escape. They walked up the stone pathway, their heavy boots crunching against the frost. They carried a court-ordered writ of possession, signed by a county judge, bearing the official embossed seal. The lead deputy pounded a fist against the mahogany front door. The sound shattered the tranquil morning silence. Thomas opened it, wearing a silk bathrobe and a scowl. He attempted to use his booming voice, demanding to know why law enforcement was disrupting his breakfast. The deputy did not flinch or step back. He handed my father the writ. The officer informed him he had exactly 2 hours to gather his personal belongings and vacate the premises. If he refused, he would be arrested for criminal trespassing on property owned by Thalia Campbell. The color drained from Thomas's face. The bluster evaporated. He looked past the deputies and saw a generic rented moving truck idling at the curb. Nadine arranged the transport. There were no white glove movers, no professional packing services. My parents had to carry their own boxes. Helen descended the grand staircase, wrapping a cashmere shawl around her shoulders. She saw the uniforms and began to weep. She reached for her cell phone and dialed Monica, expecting her golden child to rush over and provide emotional support or a financial miracle. The call went straight to a generic voicemail box. Monica was currently living in a dingy motel near the interstate, fighting her own legal battles. Graham's divorce proceedings left her penniless, and the looming federal wire fraud indictment stripped away her fragile sanity. She had abandoned the parents who created her. Thomas and Helen were entirely alone. They spent the next 120 minutes frantically stuffing designer clothing, family heirlooms, and scattered documents into black trash bags and cheap cardboard boxes. The visual contrast was stark. Decades of hoarded luxury were reduced to refuse, hauled out the front door by a disgraced patriarch in a bathrobe. Thomas struggled under the weight of a heavy silver dining set, his breathing ragged, his pride fractured beyond repair. Helen sobbed uncontrollably on the front steps, mourning the loss of the only kingdom she ever valued. The spectacle did not go unnoticed. Suburban neighborhoods function like open-air theaters. Across the street, Patricia Gable stood on her porch, holding a ceramic mug of coffee. Weeks earlier, Patricia sat in a boutique cafe and judged me, based on Helen's fabricated smear campaign. She believed the rumors about my psychological instability and the doctored financial ledgers. Now she watched her closest confidant haul garbage bags full of shoes into a rented truck under police supervision. The truth materialized on the frost-covered driveway. You do not get evicted by the county sheriff because your daughter had a mental breakdown. You face police removal because you lost a legal war. Patricia took a sip of her coffee and turned her back on her friend. She walked inside her house and locked the door. Helen's social currency reached a balance of 0. I was not present to witness the eviction. I did not park down the street to gloat or revel in their public humiliation. Vengeance requires an emotional investment I was no longer willing to provide. I sat at my desk in my corporate office, reviewing a complex medical billing spreadsheet for a regional hospital. At 10:15 in the morning, my phone vibrated silently on the glass surface. The screen lit up with a brief text message from Nadine. Premises secured. Locks changed. Keys are with the courier. I read the words, exhaled a slow breath, and returned my attention to my spreadsheet. The ledger was finally clean. The barrier between my family and my son was now permanent. During my lunch break, I contacted a high-end real estate agent. I emailed her the digital deed and authorized an immediate listing of the sprawling estate. The housing market was highly favorable. The proceeds from the sale would easily fund Finn's college tuition, a reliable vehicle when he turned 16, and a robust investment portfolio. My father tried to steal my future to sustain his delusions of grandeur. In return, his castle would finance my son's entire life. The math was poetic. I finished my workday and drove home to my secure townhouse, content in the knowledge that the physical threat was eradicated. But desperate people do not simply fade into obscurity when they lose their shelter. Stripped of his home, his money, and his reputation, Thomas found himself cornered in a cramped, temporary apartment in an unfamiliar county. A man who spent his life controlling the narrative could not tolerate silence. If he could not win in a courtroom, he decided to burn my name in the public square. Later that evening, I was cleaning the kitchen counters while Finn read a book in the living room. My phone rang with an unknown local number. I answered it, expecting a call from the real estate agent regarding the listing photographs. The voice on the other end belonged to a man speaking with a rapid, predatory cadence. He identified himself as a local investigative reporter for a tabloid news blog. He asked for a formal comment on a developing story concerning elder abuse and unlawful eviction. My father had found a new way to weaponize his victimhood, launching a final pathetic strike from the ashes of his ruined empire. He spun a tragic tale for the press, claiming his wealthy daughter unlawfully stole his home and threw him on the street. The reporter threatened to publish the hit piece by midnight if I refused to cooperate. The physical war was over, but the battle for the truth had just ignited on a much more visible battlefield. The voice on the phone possessed a nasal, hurried quality. It was the cadence of a man who measured his professional success in clicks, shares, and manufactured outrage. He introduced himself as Kevin Trent. He managed a regional digital publication that thrived on suburban scandal and sensationalized local gossip. His website was the kind of platform where factual accuracy always took a backseat to a provocative headline. Kevin informed me he had just concluded a lengthy interview with an elderly gentleman who provided a heartbreaking, exclusive story. According to this source, a wealthy, vindictive daughter manipulated a loophole in a family trust to unlawfully seize his primary residence. The source claimed he and his wife were discarded onto the street, victims of systemic elder abuse and calculated corporate greed. My father was attempting to wage a proxy war, using the lowest tier of local journalism. Thomas could no longer afford country club lawyers or high-stakes litigation. His bank accounts remained frozen under a federal injunction. He lived in a cramped, temporary rental unit far from the sprawling lawns he used to rule. His ego, however, remained intact, and it was starving for validation. If he could not defeat me in a court of law, he intended to destroy my reputation in the court of public opinion. Kevin delivered his ultimatum. He planned to publish the article at midnight. He claimed he was calling as a professional courtesy, offering me a chance to provide a defensive quote before the narrative went live to thousands of local readers. He wanted me to panic. He wanted a hysterical denial he could quote out of context to generate more traffic. A public scandal carried actual risks. I worked as a medical billing auditor for major hospital networks. My employers valued discretion and immaculate ethical standing. A viral article accusing me of defrauding my own parents could trigger an internal review at my firm. Thomas understood this. He aimed his final weapon directly at my livelihood, hoping the mere threat of a hit piece would force me to negotiate the return of his estate. I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt Kevin's rapid monologue. When he finished outlining the impending publication, I simply asked him to verify his direct email address. "I will provide a formal response in writing," I stated calmly, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I walked toward my kitchen island. "You will have it in your inbox within 5 minutes." I ended the call without waiting for his confirmation. I opened my laptop and woke the screen. Desperate people always make the same fundamental error. They assume their target will react with the same frantic energy they project. Thomas expected me to call him, begging him to call off the reporter. He expected a negotiation. Instead, I bypassed the emotional theater and focused on the structural integrity of the threat. A tabloid blogger wants controversy, but a tabloid blogger fears bankruptcy. I accessed my encrypted cloud drive. I navigated to the folder containing the legal documentation from the mediation. I downloaded a copy of the finalized forfeiture ruling, signed and stamped by the presiding county judge. The document explicitly detailed Thomas breaching the trust conditions by initiating a predatory eviction. Next, I downloaded the preliminary filing from Graham's attorneys regarding the federal wire fraud referrals. I opened a digital editing tool. I spent 2 minutes drawing thick black boxes over the sensitive banking routing numbers and personal identification details. The redactions protected the raw data while leaving the judicial seals the dates and the legal conclusions clearly visible. I drafted a new email to Kevin Trent. The subject line read, "Formal statement regarding Thomas Campbell." The body of the message was brief, stripped of any defensive language or emotional pleading. Mr. Trent. Attached to this correspondence, you will find the certified court rulings regarding the legal transfer of the property in question, as well as the pending federal criminal referrals concerning the source of your story. The documents prove the eviction was a lawful consequence of a trust forfeiture resulting from your source's own predatory actions. I hit the return key twice and typed the final paragraph. If you publish an article accusing me of elder abuse or unlawful eviction after receiving this verified judicial evidence, you are engaging in intentional libel. I have copied my legal counsel, Nadine, on this email. She specializes in corporate litigation and defamation. If your piece goes live at midnight, her firm will file a lawsuit against you and your publication at 9 tomorrow morning. We will seek punitive damages for defamation of character. Please direct all further inquiries to her office. I attached the redacted PDF files. I added Nadine's email address to the carbon copy line. I clicked send. I closed my laptop and walked back into the living room. Finn was still sitting on the rug, engrossed in his book. The domestic tranquility of our townhouse remained entirely undisturbed. I sat on the sofa, resting my head against the cushions, and watched the clock on the wall tick toward the next hour. The conflict extinguished itself in less than 15 minutes. Kevin Trent was a man who traded in gossip, not a man prepared to engage in a legitimate legal battle with a top-tier Philadelphia law firm. He opened my email, reviewed the attachments, and saw the undeniable reality of the situation. He saw the official seals of the county court. He read the summary of the wire fraud investigation. He realized the elderly victim who fed him the tragic story was actually a disgraced patriarch facing potential prison time. More importantly, Kevin saw Nadine's contact information. A quick internet search of her firm would reveal a track record of dismantling opposing parties with ruthless efficiency. The risk exponentially outweighed the reward of a few thousand web page clicks. My phone chimed with an incoming email notification. It was a reply from Kevin. The message was reduced to a single defeated sentence. The story is killed. We are declining to publish. I locked the screen. The factual armor I constructed over the past 8 months proved impenetrable. I did not need to scream my innocence from the rooftops or beg my relatives for belief. The paper trail served as an unyielding shield. Later that week, I learned through the suburban grapevine how the rest of that evening unfolded for my father. Thomas sat in his small, unfamiliar living room, watching the clock inch closer to midnight. He refreshed the local news blog repeatedly on his tablet, waiting for the article to drop. He waited for his vengeance to materialize. He wanted the world to punish the daughter who held him accountable. Midnight arrived, and the website remained unchanged. There was no article, there was no scandal. Thomas picked up his cell phone and dialed the reporter's number, demanding to know why the story was delayed. He did not hear a ringing tone. He received an automated network message indicating the call could not be completed. Kevin Trent dropped the story and immediately blocked Thomas' number, severing all contact to avoid any association with a pending federal investigation. The realization settled over Thomas in the dark, cramped apartment. He had fired his final bullet, and the chamber was empty. He possessed no money, no property, no reputation, and no voice. The leverage he wielded like a weapon his entire adult life was gone. He was finally reduced to a spectator in a world he used to command. The external war concluded. The attacks stopped because the attackers exhausted their ammunition. But survival is only the first phase of the aftermath. Securing a perimeter ensures safety, but it does not automatically heal the terrain. I had dismantled my parents' empire and protected my son from their toxicity. Yet, as the quiet days stretched into a crisp Pennsylvania winter, I found myself facing an entirely different kind of silence. Winning a war against your own blood leaves behind a unique, lingering void. The next chapter required navigating the space they left behind. When the artillery stops firing on a battlefield, the resulting silence is often deafening. You spend months bracing for the next strike, conditioning your nervous system to anticipate betrayal around every corner. Then, the calendar turns, the seasons shift, and you realize the perimeter is completely secure. Nobody is trying to breach the gates anymore. Winter settled over Pennsylvania with a bitter chill, coating the neighborhood in a thick layer of pristine white snow. Inside my townhouse, the thermostat hummed steadily, maintaining a comfortable 70 degrees. My son played a board game on the living room rug. The environment was entirely tranquil. Then the telephone rang. The caller identification displayed a familiar yet unwelcome name, Brenda. She was my mother's younger sister. During the height of the smear campaign, she fired off paragraph after paragraph of toxic accusations, calling me vindictive and unstable. I never responded to her vitriol. Now, months later, she dialed my number not to apologize for her previous cruelty, but to trade in an entirely different currency. She wanted to share the remnants of the Campbell dynasty. People who thrive on suburban drama possess a parasitic nature. When the host organism dies, they must search for a new place to feed. I answered the call, keeping my voice neutral, offering absolutely no warmth. "Thalia, I thought you should know," Brenda began, her tone dripping with manufactured sympathy that barely masked her raw, predatory intrigue. She did not ask about my well-being or Finn's second-grade academic progress. She dove straight into the wreckage. Brenda detailed the current existence of the people who once ruled our bloodline. Thomas and Helen did not relocate to a charming downsizing community after the sheriff deputies finalized their eviction. They moved 3 counties away, securing a cramped second-floor dwelling in a dated residential complex. The $1.2 million estate I seized and liquidated was replaced by thin walls, stained carpets, and a shared asphalt parking lot. My father, a man who built his entire identity around wearing tailored suits and barking orders at subordinates, was now employed at a local home improvement center. He stood in the plumbing aisle, wearing a standard-issue canvas apron, directing contractors to brass fittings and PVC pipes for $15 an hour. His frozen bank accounts and the looming shadow of the trust forfeiture eradicated his ability to secure corporate financing or leverage his former business contacts. The patriarch was reduced to an hourly wage. His booming voice, once used to shatter the confidence of his family members, was rendered irrelevant in a warehouse of building supplies. He spent his shifts taking instructions from a store manager decades younger than him. Helen suffered a different kind of purgatory. The woman who measured her worth by country club invitations and charity galas now refused to cross the threshold of her new apartment. Brenda whispered that my mother ordered her groceries online and kept the imitation wood blinds drawn shut all day. She could not bear the prospect of encountering anyone from her previous social circles. Humiliation paralyzed her. Without her affluent zip code and her platinum credit cards, her identity ceased to exist. She became a ghost, haunting a rented space, suffocating under the weight of her own disgraced legacy. The most dramatic descent belonged to the golden child. Monica faced the brutal machinery of the federal justice system without the shield of her parents' wealth. Graham's attorneys handed the prosecutors an airtight case of wire fraud and forgery. To avoid a lengthy prison sentence, my sibling accepted a severe plea deal. She received 3 years of heavily monitored probation and a strict mandate to complete 1,000 hours of community service. The pristine white Range Rover was repossessed long ago. She navigated public transportation to reach her newly mandated place of employment. The fragile sister, who previously weaponized tears to escape accountability, now folded denim jeans at a discount retail outlet in a rundown strip mall. She earned minimum wage, subjected to the grueling demands of retail customers. Her pristine manicures were replaced by paper cuts and the sheer exhaustion of manual labor. There was no husband to fund her infidelity, no father to write a check to cover her mistakes, and no sturdy scapegoat left to absorb her blame. She was finally forced to occupy the harsh, unforgiving reality the rest of the world navigates daily. I listened to Brenda's monologue without interrupting. I did not experience a surge of triumphant joy. I did not smile at the descriptions of their downfall. When my aunt finished delivering the grim updates, fully expecting me to reciprocate with my own gossip or gloat over their demise, I simply thanked her for the information and disconnected the line. I blocked her number immediately afterward. The conduit for toxic chatter was severed permanently. American cinema conditions audiences to expect a grand climax followed by a tearful redemption arc. We are taught that antagonists eventually realize their errors, show up on your doorstep in the pouring rain, and offer a profound soul-cleansing apology. They hug your child, the orchestral music swells, and the fractured biological bonds are magically restored. Modern reality rarely provides that specific fiction. Narcissists do not experience sudden epiphanies. They do not comprehend the gravity of their cruelty. Thomas probably spent his lunch breaks in the hardware store break room, blaming me for his ruined empire. Helen likely sat in the dark, cursing my name for her social exile. Monica undoubtedly viewed her probation officer as part of a massive, unfair conspiracy designed to ruin her life. They would never take accountability because doing so would require dismantling their entire worldview. Admitting fault meant admitting they were the villains of their own story. Processing that truth is a unique form of grief. I had to mourn the death of parents who were still breathing. I grieved the realization that I never truly possessed a family. I was merely a utility they discarded the moment I stopped functioning according to their selfish design. But sitting in my quiet kitchen, watching the snow fall outside the glass window, the sorrow felt remarkably hollow. It lacked any real sting. The grief was quickly replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of safety. The anxiety that dictated my childhood was completely gone. The crushing obligation to protect them from their own consequences was severed. I did not owe them my sanity, my finances, or my child. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, the floorboards silent under my deliberate steps. I opened the top drawer of my heavy oak dresser and retrieved a small felt-lined wooden box. I carried the object to the edge of the mattress and sat down. I reached into my slacks pocket and pulled out the heavy silver timepiece my grandfather Silas gave me on his deathbed. The metal felt cool against my palm. The deep scratches on the casing represented decades of hard labor, a testament to a man who built a foundation out of concrete rather than lies. He told me that time reveals all debts. He armed me with the philosophical armor required to survive the predators he unfortunately brought into the world. I used his wisdom to untangle the fraudulent ledgers, secure the estate, and protect the only innocent life in our bloodline. I pressed the side latch, watching the delicate hands tick behind the glass one final time. The audit was officially complete. The ledgers were perfectly balanced. Every stolen dollar was accounted for, and the perpetrators were paying their respective tolls in courtrooms and discount stores. I did not need to track the minutes or watch my back anymore. The hypervigilance that defined my existence was no longer necessary. I placed the silver heirloom gently inside the felt-lined container. I closed the lid, the brass hinges snapping shut with a definitive final click. I slid the box onto the highest shelf in my closet, pushing it far into the dark corner. The time for examining the past was over. That chapter of my life was permanently sealed, locked away alongside the memories of the people who tried to break me. I turned around and walked back down the stairs to join my son, leaving the ghosts exactly where they belonged. October returned to Pennsylvania exactly 12 months after the anniversary dinner. The calendar shifted, bringing the familiar autumn chill and the dark, bruised skies that defined the season. Outside my living room window, a severe thunderstorm battered the neighborhood. Sheets of cold rain lashed against the insulated glass. The wind bent the branches of the ancient oak trees lining the street, tearing dead leaves from their stems and scattering them across the wet asphalt. It was the exact type of weather that once served as a weapon against my child. Last year, a storm was an instrument of cruelty. My biological relatives used the freezing temperature to enforce obedience, locking a shivering boy on a stone terrace to teach him a twisted lesson about their authority. This year, the rain was just weather. It held no power. It could not breach the perimeter I constructed. Inside the townhouse, the environment was meticulously cultivated to provide warmth. The thermostat sat at a steady 72 degrees. A fire crackled in the gas hearth, casting a soft orange glow across the polished hardwood floors. The scent of cinnamon and roasting apples drifted from the kitchen oven. The contrast between the harsh elements outside and the serene atmosphere indoors served as a physical manifestation of our new reality. We were untouchable. Finn sat at the kitchen island. He wore thick wool socks and a comfortable fleece sweater. He was 8 years old now, his posture relaxed, his small shoulders free from the tension that used to define his interactions with adults. He leaned over a large sheet of white construction paper, gripping a set of colored pencils. He was drawing a sprawling cityscape, detailing the architecture of towering skyscrapers and complex suspension bridges. He worked with quiet focus, humming a low, steady tune under his breath. I stood near the sink, drying a ceramic coffee mug with a cotton towel, watching him create. In the Campbell household, children were treated as inconvenient accessories. They were expected to remain silent, perfectly groomed, and invisible until a photograph required their presence. Any display of genuine emotion or messy creativity met swift punishment. Finn used to flinch when a door slammed. He used to apologize for simply taking up space. I turned my gaze toward the stainless steel refrigerator. The metallic surface was barely visible. It was covered edge to edge with Finn's artwork secured by dozens of magnetic clips. There were watercolor paintings of local parks, crayon sketches of stray animals, and intricate maps of imaginary planets. Each piece represented a moment where he felt safe enough to express his mind without fear of ridicule. I displayed them proudly, creating a rotating gallery of his cognitive development. He was not a burden to be managed. He was the center of my universe, and the kitchen decor proved it. The front doorbell chimed a soft melodic sound, cutting through the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the roof. I did not tense. I did not run to the security monitors to check for hostile intruders. The people who meant us harm lacked the address, the financial resources, and the legal capacity to approach my porch. I walked to the entryway and opened the heavy wooden door. Graham stood on the welcome mat, holding a large black umbrella to shield himself from the downpour. The man standing before me bore little resemblance to the hollow, exhausted executive who showed up at my doorstep a year ago demanding financial evidence. Graham looked rejuvenated. His wrinkled suit was replaced by a high-quality charcoal overcoat and casual denim. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, erased by months of uninterrupted sleep and the closure of a brutal, highly publicized divorce. He navigated the wreckage Monica left behind, utilized the forensic audit ledgers I provided, and salvaged his commercial real estate empire. We did not speak often, but the shared trauma forged a permanent, silent, mutual respect. "I am sorry to drop by unannounced," Talia Graham said, his voice carrying over the sound of the wind. "I was driving back from a commercial property inspection in the next county and wanted to drop this off before the weather worsened." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, neatly wrapped rectangular box, tied with a silver ribbon. He handed it to me, brushing a few stray raindrops from his sleeve. "It is for Finn," he explained. "I know his birthday was last week. It is a starter architectural drafting kit. I remembered he liked drawing buildings the last time we spoke." I took the box, appreciating the genuine thought behind the gesture. "Thank you, Graham. He will love it. Would you like to come inside and dry off? I have fresh coffee brewing." Graham offered a polite, authentic smile. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to get back to the city before the roads flood. I just wanted to make sure he received it." "You both look well, Talia, truly. We are doing very well," I replied. He nodded, stepping backward into the rain. He opened his umbrella, walked down the driveway to his waiting vehicle, and drove away. The interaction lasted less than 3 minutes, but it carried immense weight. It was a reminder that a person can survive the destruction of a toxic bond and emerge on the other side capable of maintaining healthy, respectful connections. Graham was not a fixture in our daily routine, but he represented a survivor of the same war. We fought in the same trenches, dismantled the same enemy, and found our own distinct versions of peace. I closed the front door and engaged the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed in the quiet foyer. I walked back into the kitchen and set the wrapped gift on the counter next to Finn's colored pencils. He looked up, his eyes widening with curiosity, and I told him he could open it after dinner. He grinned and returned to his cityscape. I leaned against the granite island, letting the profound stillness of the house wash over me. The journey from that freezing country club terrace to this warm kitchen tested every limit of my endurance. The default societal expectation insists that family disputes must be resolved through forgiveness and endless compromises. We are taught to endure disrespect in the name of biological loyalty. My parents relied on that cultural conditioning. They assumed I would absorb their financial theft and their emotional abuse to maintain the illusion of a unified clan. I rejected their script. I reflected on the specific mechanics of my victory. I did not win by screaming louder than my father. I did not win by matching my mother's manipulative tears or my sister's frantic theatrical performances. Engaging in their emotional warfare would have only dragged me deeper into the mud they wallowed in. I secured our freedom through clinical, unshakable boundaries. I treated their toxicity as an auditing assignment. I gathered irrefutable evidence. I leveraged the exact legal mechanisms they tried to use against me. I let the objective reality of bank statements, forged signatures, and trust clauses do the talking. When they brought physical threats, I brought notarized documents. When they sent smear campaigns, I deployed federal criminal referrals. I prioritized my son's physical and psychological safety over the comfort of the people who shared my last name. True protection does not require vengeance. It requires the quiet, terrifying resolve to remove dangerous people from your orbit permanently, regardless of the titles they hold. You do not negotiate with predators, you lock them out. The smell of the roasting apples grew stronger, signaling the oven timer was moments away from ringing. Thin packed away his pencils, admiring the finished drawing of a bridge spanning a wide blue river. He asked if he could hang it on the refrigerator. I handed him a circular magnet and watched him find a prime central spot for his creation, right next to a watercolor painting of a cardinal. I poured a cup of hot tea and walked into the living room. I stood in front of the large picture window, holding the warm ceramic mug in both hands. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. The rain continued to wash the streets, carrying away the debris of the changing season, clearing the path forward. My former family was out there somewhere navigating the bitter cold of their own consequences. Thomas was likely wearing his canvas apron, sweeping aisles under fluorescent lights. Helen was hiding in her dark apartment, terrified of the outside world. Monica was serving out her probation, counting the hours until her shift ended. Their world was turbulent, fractured, and unforgiving. They engineered their own isolation. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the faint notes of bergamot and honey. The heat from the fireplace radiated against my back. The laughter of my son echoed from the kitchen as he admired his newly displayed artwork. I looked down at the heavy brass key resting on the entryway table. It was the only key that mattered. I held the power to decide who crossed the threshold of this sanctuary. The war was a closed file. The ledgers were clean. I watched the rain batter the glass, secure in the fortress I built and entirely at peace.